They thought Eagle's Nest Auto Shop was just another small-town garage, an easy target for the Iron Wolves MC to expand their criminal operation into the Colorado mountains. The sight of Sarah Mitchell, a young mechanic carrying on her mother's legacy, made them confident this would be a simple takeover. What the ruthless bikers didn't realize was that her quiet, unassuming father, Michael, wasn't just another grease monkey working under the hood. He was a former Army Special Forces demolitions expert with 18 years of classified operations experience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Whose gentle demeanor masked combat skills that had dismantled terrorist networks across 3 continents. The sun had barely crested the Rocky Mountains when Sarah Mitchell rolled up the heavy garage doors of Eagle's Nest Auto Shop. At 24, her skilled hands could diagnose an engine's ailments as easily as most people could read a book, a gift inherited from her mother along with the family business. The early morning light filtered through the mountain mist, casting long shadows across the weathered concrete floor, where 3 generations of Mitchells had built their reputation for honest work and fair prices. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and motor oil as Michael Mitchell moved methodically through his morning routine, checking inventory and preparing for the day ahead. At 52, his strong hands showed the calluses of both mechanical work and military service, though few would guess the latter by looking at his unassuming presence. The locals knew him only as a widowed father who'd returned home to help his daughter run the family business after his wife's passing 5 years ago. They didn't know about the combat medals locked away in his workshop safe, or the specialized training that made him hyper-aware of every vehicle and visitor that entered their property. Sarah watched her father through the office window as he worked, noticing how he always positioned himself to maintain clear sight lines to both entrances, a habit she'd noticed but never questioned. The morning light caught the silver in his dark hair, earned as much from stress as age, though his movements remained precise and purposeful. To most, he appeared to be simply preparing for another day of oil changes and brake jobs, but Sarah had begun to notice subtle patterns in his behavior, the way his eyes tracked movement on the street, how he instinctively assessed every stranger who pulled into their lot. The familiar rumble of arriving customers' vehicles filled the mountain air as Eagle's Nest Auto came to life. Tommy Chen, their youngest mechanic, arrived right on schedule, his enthusiasm for learning the trade reminding Sarah of herself at his age. Old Mr. Henderson pulled up in his beloved '67 Mustang that needed its weekly tinkering, and Mrs. Patterson dropped off her minivan for its regular service. The normal rhythm of small-town life continued as it had for decades in Silver Peak, Colorado. Through the large bay doors, Sarah could see Main Street beginning to stir. The coffee shop across the way was setting out its sidewalk signs, and the hardware store was receiving its morning deliveries. Everything felt normal, peaceful, the same routine that had defined their close-knit mountain community for generations. But something in the air felt different today, a tension she couldn't quite name but could sense in her father's unusually alert posture. "Weather reports calling for storms," Michael commented as he wiped his hands on a shop rag, his voice carrying its usual calm. But Sarah noticed his eyes scanning the street beyond their property, reading something in the morning activity that others might miss. She'd grown up in this garage, learned every tool and technique at her mother's side, but lately she'd begun to wonder about the father who'd been absent for so many years during her childhood. The official story, that he'd worked as a military contractor, had always seemed too simple, too neat. The shop phone rang, drawing Sarah's attention. It was Carl from the sheriff's department, warning them about reports of a motorcycle gang moving through nearby towns. "Just a heads up," he said, his voice carrying an edge of concern. "They've been visiting local businesses, offering protection. Couple places over in Rivers Bend got hit pretty hard when they refused." Michael absorbed this information with the same steady demeanor he showed while diagnosing a complex engine problem, but Sarah caught the subtle shift in his stance. A stillness that seemed more strategic than casual. She remembered moments like this from her childhood, rare occasions when something would change in her father's bearing, transforming him from a simple mechanic into something else entirely. The morning continued with its usual parade of customers and repairs, but now Sarah noticed her father making small adjustments to their routine. He moved certain tools closer to hand, repositioned vehicles in the lot to maintain better sight lines, and made a few quiet phone calls from his private office. To anyone else, it would appear to be nothing more than normal business operations. But Sarah had inherited more than just her mother's mechanical aptitude. She had her father's instinct for recognizing when something wasn't quite right. As the morning progressed, the distant sound of motorcycles echoed off the mountain slopes, growing steadily closer. Michael paused in his work, his hands stilling on the engine he was repairing. His expression remained calm, but Sarah recognized a new alertness in his bearing, like a sensor picking up approaching danger. The peaceful routine of Eagle's Nest Auto Shop was about to be disrupted, and Sarah was about to learn that some family legacies ran deeper than engine oil and repair manuals. The morning sun climbed higher over Silver Peak, casting sharp shadows between the massive tool cabinets and hydraulic lifts of Eagle's Nest Auto Shop. Sarah Mitchell moved with practiced efficiency beneath the hood of Mrs. Patterson's minivan, her hands instinctively finding problems that less experienced mechanics might miss. She'd learned early that cars, unlike people, always told the truth if you knew how to listen. A failing bearing had its own distinctive song, a worn belt its particular rhythm. These were the lessons her mother had taught her, passed down through 3 generations of Mitchell women who had defied expectations in a male-dominated industry. Tommy Chen worked at the next bay over, his young face scrunched in concentration as he tackled a complex transmission issue under Michael's quiet guidance. "Listen to the way it shifts," Michael instructed, his voice carrying the same steady patience he used whether explaining a timing belt replacement or, Sarah now realized, probably teaching combat techniques during his military years. "Every machine has a language of its own. Learn to speak it, and it'll tell you exactly what it needs." The familiar symphony of the shop filled the air. Impact wrenches singing their staccato songs, the low hum of diagnostic equipment, the occasional clash of tools being selected and returned to their proper places. Michael had always insisted on organization, a trait Sarah had originally attributed to his mechanical mindset, but now wondered if it stemmed from his military background. Every tool had its place, every procedure its proper sequence, every task its complete documentation. Through the open bay doors, the Colorado morning had bloomed into the kind of autumn day that drew tourists to the mountains. Aspen leaves shimmered gold against the deep blue sky, and the air carried that peculiar crispness that suggested winter wasn't far away. Mr. Henderson sat in his usual spot, nursing a coffee while watching them work on his beloved Mustang, sharing stories about the car's history that everyone in the shop had heard at least a dozen times before. Sarah caught glimpses of her father as she worked, noticing things she'd somehow missed before. The way he always kept his back to a wall when possible, how his eyes regularly swept the street beyond their property, the subtle tension in his shoulders when unfamiliar vehicles slowed while passing the shop. These weren't the habits of a simple mechanic, but they were so smoothly integrated into his daily routine that they seemed natural, unremarkable, unless you knew to look for them. The shop's radio played quietly in the background, local news mixing with classic rock as the morning progressed. Between songs, reports trickled in about motorcycle gang activity in neighboring towns. Rivers Bend Hardware had its windows smashed last night. The diner in Mesa Junction was dealing with accidental kitchen damage. Each report caused Michael's movements to pause briefly, his attention sharpening though his expression remained neutral. "Dad," Sarah called out, gesturing to a particularly troublesome fuel line she was struggling to access. As he moved to help her, she noticed how his path through the shop was never random, always maintaining clear sight lines, always keeping aware of exit routes, always positioning himself optimally relative to the doors. These weren't the patterns she'd learned from her mother's teachings about shop management. Their regular customers continued their usual rotation through the morning. Pete from the lumberyard brought in his work truck for its weekly checkup. Susan Chen, Tommy's mother and owner of the Chinese restaurant down the street, stopped by to drop off lunch for her son, and extra portions for the Mitchells, as she'd done ever since Sarah's mother passed. Each interaction carried the comfortable familiarity of small-town life, where everyone's story intertwined with everyone else's. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mountain air grew warmer as noon approached, carrying now the mixed scents of motor oil, Susan's Chinese food, and the pine forest that surrounded Silver Peak. Michael worked steadily on a complex engine rebuild, his movements precise and economical. Yet Sarah noticed he'd positioned himself so he could monitor both the street and the back alley through the shop's mirrors. She wondered how many other habits she'd grown up with, thinking them normal mechanics' quirks, were actually born from years of military operations. A Colorado State Police cruiser pulled into the lot, and Officer Martinez stepped out, ostensibly for his regular oil change. But the way he and Michael exchanged glances suggested another purpose. They spoke quietly near the office, their conversation masked by the shop's normal operations. Sarah caught fragments about moving up the valley, and 3 more shops hit yesterday. Tommy continued his work on the transmission, completely absorbed in his task, while Mr. Henderson launched into another story about his Mustang's glory days. The regular rhythm of the shop continued, but beneath it all, Sarah sensed a current of tension building, like the pressure in a fuel line just before a problem reveals itself. She'd learned from both her parents that prevention was always better than repair, but some problems, it seemed, couldn't be headed off with routine maintenance. As Sarah finished up with Mrs. Patterson's minivan, she noticed her father making a series of phone calls from his office, his voice too low to hear, but his posture suggesting these weren't routine business calls. The morning's earlier reports of motorcycle gang activity felt more immediate now, more threatening, like storm clouds gathering over their peaceful mountain community. Something was coming to Silver Peak, and Sarah was beginning to understand that her father's preparations went far beyond protecting just their shop. The first warning came as a deep rumble echoing off the mountain slopes, growing steadily louder as it approached Silver Peak. Sarah was finishing up an oil change when she felt it. That distinctive vibration of multiple heavyweight motorcycles moving in formation. Her father's hands stilled on the engine he was rebuilding, though his expression remained carefully neutral. Tommy, young and curious, moved toward the bay doors, but Michael's quiet voice stopped him. "Best finish up that transmission first, son." The sound grew closer, and now Sarah could distinguish individual engines, at least 6, maybe 8 machines, their exhausts deliberately tuned to intimidate. Through the shop's wide doors, she watched as the first riders appeared around the bend in Main Street. Their bikes were expensive customs, matte black with chrome accents catching the midday sun. The Iron Wolves MC patches on their leather cuts marked them clearly, the same gang they'd heard about on the morning news. Michael methodically wiped his hands on a shop rag, his movements unhurried but precise. He positioned himself near his toolbox, appearing to any observer as nothing more than a mechanic preparing to greet potential customers. But Sarah noticed how this position gave him clear access to both exits and an unobstructed view of the entire shop floor. Mr. Henderson, still waiting for his Mustang, seemed to shrink in his chair, his usually endless stories falling silent. 4 bikes pulled into the lot while the others kept running, circling slowly on the street outside. Their engines growled like predators marking territory. The leader, a massive man with a graying beard and arms covered in faded military tattoos, dismounted first. His cut identified him as Stryker, and his bearing suggested someone used to being obeyed. His boots left heavy impressions in the gravel as he approached the shop entrance, 2 of his men flanking him while the 4th watched the street. "Nice operation you got here," Stryker called out, his voice carrying a forced friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. He scanned the shop with the practiced assessment of someone looking for weaknesses. "Real professional setup. Family business, right?" The question wasn't really a question. They'd obviously done their research. Sarah stepped forward, wiping her hands on her work coveralls. "Eagle's Nest Auto. Can we help you with something?" She kept her voice steady, channeling her mother's professional confidence. Michael remained by his toolbox, watching the scene unfold with deceptive casualness. Stryker's smile widened, revealing gold-capped teeth. "Matter of fact, you can. See, we're expanding our business interests in the area, offering protection services to local establishments, times being what they are, lot of unfortunate accidents happening to unprotected businesses." His eyes wandered to the expensive equipment, the classic cars under restoration, the computerized diagnostic systems. Be a shame if anything happened to all this nice machinery. Tommy had frozen at his workbench, a wrench gripped tightly in his hand. Mr. Henderson stared intently into his empty coffee cup. Through the open doors, Sarah could see pedestrians hurrying past, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the bikers still circling outside. The peaceful mountain morning had transformed into something darker, more threatening. "We have insurance," Sarah replied, her voice firm despite her racing heart, "and a good relationship with local law enforcement." She felt rather than saw her father shift his position slightly, adjusting to the movements of Stryker's men as they spread out in the shop. Stryker's expression hardened. "Insurance companies, police, they show up after bad things happen. We prevent bad things from happening in the first place. For a reasonable weekly fee, of course." He moved closer to a pristine 1970 Chevelle that was nearly restored, running a finger along its polished fender. $2,000 a week guarantees nothing unfortunate occurs. Special introductory rate, seeing as how we're new in town." "That's quite an offer." Michael spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a calm authority that made Stryker turn to study him more carefully. "But we'll have to decline. Eagle's Nest has managed just fine for 3 generations without outside protection." Something shifted in Stryker's demeanor as he focused on Michael. Sarah saw a flash of recognition, or perhaps professional assessment, cross the biker's face. "You served," Stryker stated flatly. It wasn't a question. Man can always tell another vet, "Where'd you do your time?" "Here and there," Michael replied evenly. "Mostly motor pool maintenance." The lie was delivered with perfect casualness, but Sarah caught the slight tension in her father's shoulders, the way his fingers rested near a specific drawer in his toolbox. Stryker's eyes narrowed. "Funny thing about motor pool mechanics, don't usually stand like operators. Don't usually read a room like they're planning exit strategies." His hand drifted toward his leather cut, and Sarah noticed his 2 men subtly shifting their positions. "Maybe we should have a private conversation vet to vet about how things work in Iron Wolf's territory." The air in the shop grew heavy with tension. Tommy had backed away from his workbench, instinctively moving closer to the office. Mr. Henderson sat perfectly still, his weathered hands gripping his coffee cup like a lifeline. Outside, the circling bikes had stopped their patrol, their riders watching the shop entrance with predatory focus. Michael's expression remained unchanged, but something in his bearing shifted subtly. A change so slight most would miss it, but one that made Stryker's men exchange uncertain glances. "Think we've covered the basics," Michael replied, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "You've made your offer. We've declined. Best leave it at that for now." Stryker's departure left a heavy silence hanging over Eagle's Nest Auto Shop, broken only by the gradually fading rumble of motorcycle engines. Sarah watched through the bay doors as the Iron Wolves disappeared around the mountain bend, their threat lingering in the air like exhaust fumes. Mr. Henderson finally released his death grip on the coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly as he set it down. "Tommy," Michael called quietly, his voice carrying the same steady calm he used when teaching complex repairs. "Take your lunch break now. Stop by your mother's restaurant, stay there a while." The young mechanic nodded, understanding the unspoken instruction to warn his family. As Tommy hurried out the back door, Michael moved to the shop's entrance, his eyes scanning the street with new intensity. Sarah watched her father, seeing him with fresh eyes. His movements had changed subtly since the biker's departure, more fluid, more purposeful. Each position carefully chosen for optimal awareness of their surroundings. These weren't the habits of a simple motor pool mechanic. She remembered fragments from her childhood, mysterious phone calls, unexpected absences, skills that seemed out of place for someone who supposedly just fixed military vehicles. "Dad," she started, but Michael held up a hand, moving to the office. He closed the door behind them, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen. From his desk drawer, he withdrew a worn leather folder, its surface scarred and weathered. "There are things you need to know," he said quietly. "Things I hoped would stay in the past. But Stryker's right. He can spot military training. And he's smart enough to know I'm not what I claim to be." The folder contained photographs and documents, carefully preserved despite their age. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she looked at images of a younger version of her father, not in motor pool coveralls, but in full combat gear, his face masked and stripped of all identifying markings. The documents were heavily redacted, but phrases like demolitions expert and counter-terrorism operations jumped out from the black lines. 18th Special Forces Group, Michael explained, his voice low. Specialized in disrupting illegal weapons trafficking and dismantling terrorist infrastructure. The motor pool story was cover, something simple, believable, explaining the mechanical skills without raising questions. He paused, watching his daughter process this revelation. Your mother knew. It's partly why she was so determined you should learn every aspect of running the shop. She wanted you to be independent if anything ever happened. Through the office window, Sarah could see Mr. Henderson finally leaving, his beloved Mustang forgotten in the current crisis. On the street, normal activity had resumed, but there was a new tension in the air. People moved more quickly, glancing over their shoulders, hurrying past the spot where the Iron Wolves had parked. Those tattoos on Stryker's arms, Michael continued, gathering the documents back into their folder. Not just military, special operations. The way he moves, the way his men coordinate without obvious signals. They're not ordinary bikers playing at being tough. This is a professional operation using the motorcycle gang as cover. His eyes narrowed slightly. The protection racket isn't their real purpose here. Sarah thought about the gang's recent activities in nearby towns, the pattern of their movements up the valley. What are they really after? She asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Silver Peak sits at a crossroads, Michael explained, moving to the window. 3 major mountain passes, minimal law enforcement presence, perfect location for moving things that shouldn't be moved. The Iron Wolves aren't just marking territory, they're setting up a distribution network. The protection racket is just to establish control, make people afraid to ask questions when strange vehicles start moving through at odd hours. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the shop as Sarah absorbed this information. Every tool, every machine, every familiar corner of Eagle's Nest Auto suddenly felt different, like props in a play about to become very real. What do we do? She asked, her voice stronger than she expected. Michael's expression shifted subtly, not the face of a father worried about his daughter, but something harder, more tactical. First, we prepare. Stryker will research, try to identify my real background. When that fails, and it will fail, those records are buried too deep. He'll push harder, try to provoke a response that confirms his suspicions. He moved to his toolbox, opening a drawer Sarah had never seen him use. But he made a crucial mistake today. What mistake? Sarah asked, watching her father's methodical movements. He revealed too much. Professional operators trying to hide as ordinary criminals don't usually show their training so clearly. He's overconfident, thinks his military background gives him the advantage. Michael's hands moved surely through the tools, but Sarah noticed he was checking sight lines, angles, potential cover positions. He doesn't realize that while he's been playing outlaw, I've spent 2 decades perfecting ways to dismantle operations exactly like his. Sarah looked around the shop, at the lifts that could become barriers, the tool cabinets that could provide cover, the seemingly random arrangement of vehicles that she now realized gave clear lanes of movement while restricting access. Her father hadn't just been running a garage all these years, he'd been maintaining a defensive position while hiding in plain sight. We're not just going to survive this, are we? She asked, recognizing something in her father's bearing that she'd glimpsed only in rare moments throughout her childhood. We're going to stop them. Michael's smile was slight but carried an edge of steel. Eagle's Nest has been in our family for 3 generations. Your mother built this place into something special. Some things are worth fighting for. He paused, his expression softening slightly. But first we need to make some calls. I wasn't the only one who left the service with unfinished business. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Eagle's Nest Auto Shop when the Iron Wolves returned. This time, the rumble of approaching motorcycles carried a different tone. More aggressive, more purposeful. Sarah was closing up the last repair job of the day when she heard them, and she noticed her father's subtle shift in posture before the sound even reached her ears. His enhanced situational awareness, she now realized, had never really been about automotive safety. Stryker led a larger group this time, 12 bikes instead of 8, their riders carrying themselves with military precision that barely masked their violent intentions. They formed a semicircle around the shop's entrance, cutting off easy access to the street. Through the growing dusk, their matte black machines looked like creatures from a darker world, invading Silver Peak's peaceful valley. As the bikers dismounted, Sarah noticed subtle differences from their morning visit. Their leather cuts now concealed obvious bulges suggesting hidden weapons. Their formation spoke of tactical training, automatically covering all angles of approach. These weren't ordinary gang members. These were trained operators playing at being outlaws, and they'd dropped some of their pretense. "Found some interesting things about you, mechanic," Stryker called out as he approached, making the word sound like an accusation. His previous attempt at friendly persuasion had vanished, replaced by cold professionalism. "Made some calls to old contacts. Funny thing, nobody seems to remember you in any motor pool units. Actually, nobody seems to remember you at all." Michael continued wiping his hands on a shop rag, his movements unhurried but precise. "Lot of mechanics in the service," he replied mildly. "Can't expect everyone to remember every wrench turner." But Sarah saw how he'd positioned himself near the reinforced tool cabinet, the one she now suspected, that contained more than just automotive equipment. Stryker's scarred face twisted into something ugly. "See, that's where you're wrong. People remember their mechanics, especially in special operations units. They're the ones who keep you alive out there." He moved closer, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. "But you're a ghost. No records, no history, nothing but perfectly crafted paperwork that's just a little too perfect." Two of Stryker's men had circled around toward the back of the shop, while others maintained their positions outside. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of men who'd done this before, but Michael seemed almost dismissive of their tactical positioning. Sarah realized he'd been expecting this, had probably planned for it since their morning visit. "Looking for something specific?" Michael asked, his voice carrying a new edge that made several of the bikers tense slightly. "Or just window shopping?" The casual words carried a deeper challenge that only professional operators would recognize. Stryker's eyes narrowed. "This valley's perfect for our operation. Remote, multiple access points, local law enforcement stretched thin across too much territory. Everything was going smooth until we hit Silver Peak. Then suddenly we're hearing about a mechanic who moves like a Tier 1 operator and runs interference with our plans." "Sounds like you've got a problem then," Michael replied. His stance hadn't changed, but something in his bearing shifted. A predator letting its camouflage slip slightly. "Might want to take your operation elsewhere. Plenty of other valleys in Colorado." Sarah watched the tension build, remembering her father's words about Stryker pushing for a response that would confirm his suspicions. But Michael gave them nothing, maintaining his cover of simple mechanic while subtly controlling the confrontation's flow. "Here's what's going to happen," Stryker announced, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You're going to sign over 51% ownership of Eagle's Nest Auto to our holding company. We need legitimate businesses for our operation, and a garage is perfect for our needs. You and your daughter can keep working here, keep up appearances. Or—" He gestured to his men, who had begun examining the shop's expensive equipment with exaggerated interest. "That's quite an offer," Michael responded, echoing his words from their morning encounter. "But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. You seem to think you're negotiating." His voice remained calm, but carried something that made several of Stryker's more experienced men exchange uncertain glances. "You're not. You're trespassing. This is your last chance to leave Silver Peak permanently." Stryker's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Or what, mechanic? You'll call the cops? You'll maybe show us some more of those moves that gave you away this morning? I've got 12 men here, all ex-military, all combat tested. You're one man defending a garage." "No," Michael corrected quietly. "I'm a father defending his family's legacy, and you're 12 men who've forgotten the difference between being warriors and being thugs." His eyes met Stryker's with an intensity that made the bigger man step back slightly. "Look around your formation again. Count your angles of attack. Then ask yourself why I seem so calm about your tactical positioning." A sudden uncertainty flickered across Stryker's face as he processed Michael's words, really looking at how his men were arranged. Something about the shop's layout, the placement of vehicles and equipment, suddenly seemed less random and more engineered. "You have until closing time tomorrow," Stryker growled, but his voice carried less conviction. "Think about our offer. Think about your daughter's future." He gestured to his men, and they began backing toward their bikes, maintaining defensive positions that seemed more about protecting themselves than intimidating others. As the iron wolves roared away into the gathering darkness, Sarah looked at her father with new understanding. "They'll be back," she said quietly. Michael nodded, his expression grim. "Yes, but next time we'll be ready. Time to call in some old debts." After securing the shop for the night, Michael led Sarah to a hidden room behind the main office. The space was concealed behind what appeared to be a standard storage closet, but the heavy steel door and sophisticated lock suggested something far more serious. Inside, Sarah found herself standing in what looked like a military command center compressed into a small space. Multiple monitors showed security feeds from around the property, and a reinforced gun safe occupied one corner. "Your mother helped me set this up," Michael explained, his voice soft with memory as he entered a complex code into a hidden panel. "She understood what it meant to be married to someone like me. The constant vigilance, the need for contingency plans. She was the strongest person I've ever known." The panel slid aside, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and military equipment that told the story of a life Sarah had never known existed. "I wasn't just special forces," Michael continued, spreading photographs across a small tactical desk. "I was part of a specialized unit within 18th Group. We called ourselves the Ghost Makers. Official records listed us as demolitions experts, but our real mission was dismantling international weapons trafficking networks." The photos showed younger versions of her father with teams whose faces were carefully blurred, standing in locations Sarah recognized from news reports about conflict zones. Sarah picked up one photograph that caught her eye. Her father, younger but recognizable, standing beside a massive explosion. "We didn't just destroy weapons caches," Michael explained, noting her interest. "We engineered accidents that looked natural, created failures that seemed coincidental. The goal was to disrupt criminal operations without revealing our involvement. Make them paranoid, make them suspect each other, eventually make them dismantle their own networks." More documents emerged, mission reports heavily redacted, commendations for operations that officially never happened, maps marked with locations across 3 continents. "The Ghost Makers weren't just soldiers," Michael continued. "We were specialists in psychological warfare, experts at making criminal organizations implode from within. That's why our records are buried so deep. Can't leave evidence of operations designed to look like accidents." "But why here?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the auto shop above. "Why come back to Silver Peak?" She'd always assumed it was because of her mother's illness, his desire to help with the family business. Michael's expression softened. "Your mother wasn't just running a garage while I was away. She was my anchor, my connection to a normal life. But she was also my early warning system. Silver Peak's location makes it perfect for monitoring suspicious traffic through the mountains. She kept track of unusual patterns, vehicles that didn't belong, cargo that didn't match manifests. That's how we met. She caught something odd about a series of trucks passing through, reported it to authorities. Those trucks turned out to be part of an operation I was tracking." Sarah absorbed this information, seeing her mother in a new light. The woman who'd taught her to rebuild engines had also been part of a sophisticated intelligence network. The shop's layout, she realized suddenly. The way everything's positioned. This wasn't just about efficient workflow, was it? "Your mother was brilliant at that," Michael smiled. "Making tactical advantages look like ordinary business decisions. Every security camera appears to be standard theft prevention. Every defensive position seems like natural equipment placement. She understood that the best cover isn't just about looking normal. It's about being normal while maintaining complete tactical awareness." He moved to the gun safe, opening it to reveal not just weapons, but sophisticated surveillance equipment. These mountains have always attracted people looking to move things quietly. Usually it's just small-time smuggling, nothing requiring our attention. But the Iron Wolves, They're different. Professional, well-organized with military training. They're setting up something big, something that reminds me of operations I used to track overseas. Sarah thought about Stryker's tactical assessment of the valley, his team's military precision. They're not just here for a protection racket, are they? No, Michael confirmed grimly. They're establishing infrastructure. The protection racket is just to secure control of key properties, create legitimate fronts for their real operation. Eagle's Nest is perfect for their needs. Mechanical expertise, ability to modify vehicles, legitimate reason for unusual traffic at odd hours. He paused, studying a particular document. But they made a crucial mistake choosing this valley. What mistake? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand. They thought they were just dealing with local resistance. Instead, they've stumbled onto something that's been waiting for exactly this kind of operation. Michael activated another monitor, showing a network of similar shops and businesses throughout the mountain range. Your mother wasn't the only one watching these passes. There's a whole network of veterans and their families, maintaining quiet vigilance while living normal lives. The Iron Wolves think they're taking over a simple mountain town. Instead, they've walked into a trap 20 years in the making. Sarah looked at her father with new understanding. Every quiet lesson about engines and repair work had also been training in observation and problem-solving. Every insistence on precision and attention to detail had been preparing her for something bigger than just running a garage. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the weight of these revelations. Michael's expression hardened slightly. "Now, we remind them why some quiet mechanics are best left undisturbed. I've already made some calls. Old teammates who've been waiting for a chance to shut down an operation like this. The Iron Wolves think they're the predators in this valley. Time to show them how wrong they are." The next morning brought news that sent ripples of fear through Silver Peak. Susan Chen burst into Eagle's Nest Auto just after opening, her usually cheerful face drawn with worry and anger. "They came to the restaurant last night," she said, her hands trembling as she gripped the counter. "After closing, 3 of them said they were just looking around, but they knocked over tables, broke dishes, said accidents happen when businesses don't have proper protection." Michael's expression remained calm, but Sarah saw the tactical assessment in his eyes as he processed this information. "Anyone hurt?" he asked quietly, already knowing what this escalation meant. The Iron Wolves were sending a message. No business in Silver Peak was safe. "No, thank God. Tommy was at his friend's house. But they left this." Susan pulled out a crumpled paper, a contract for security services with an astronomical weekly fee. 5 other businesses got the same visit. The hardware store, the pharmacy, even old Joe's garage on the other side of town. Through the shop's windows, Sarah could see unusual activity on Main Street. Groups of business owners gathered in worried clusters, sharing similar stories. Officer Martinez's police cruiser moved slowly through town, but everyone knew the local force was too small to handle an organized threat like the Iron Wolves. "They're getting bolder," Michael observed, his voice carrying an edge that only Sarah now recognized, moving faster than expected. "Something's pushing their timeline." He turned to Susan, his manner shifting to gentle reassurance. "Board up any broken windows, document everything, but don't sign anything they give you. And Susan, maybe let Tommy stay with relatives for a few days." As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy's motorcycle roared into the lot. The young mechanic practically ran into the shop, his face flushed with anger. "Mom, I just heard. Why didn't you call me? I could have—" He stopped as Michael's hand fell on his shoulder. "Could have what, son? Taken on 3 armed men by yourself?" Michael's voice was quiet but carried authority that made Tommy pause. "Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when not to fight. At least, not until you're ready to win." More visitors arrived throughout the morning, each bringing similar stories. Mr. Peterson from the hardware store described mysterious electrical problems that had destroyed thousands of dollars in inventory. The pharmacy reported their delivery truck's brake lines had been accidentally cut. Old Joe's garage found all their diagnostic computers smashed, a particularly pointed message to the automotive community. Sheriff Hayes arrived around mid-morning, his weathered face grim. 11 incidents last night, he reported quietly to Michael. All following the same pattern. Just enough damage to scare people, not enough to justify major police response. They know exactly how to play this. He paused, studying Michael with knowing eyes. Word is they're specifically interested in your shop. Something about the owner having an interesting background. Sarah watched her father absorb this information while maintaining his cover of simple mechanic, noticing how he kept perfect awareness of everyone's positions in the shop. The morning's regular customers still came and went, but there was a new tension in every interaction. People spoke in whispers, glancing nervously at the street, jumping at the sound of any approaching motorcycle. Gloria Martinez, the sheriff's wife and owner of the local diner, stopped by with coffee and news. "They're offering to buy into businesses now," she reported, her voice bitter. 51% ownership in exchange for protection. 3 places have already agreed. Can't blame them, after what happened to the pharmacy. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They're not just marking territory anymore," he said quietly to Sarah after Gloria left. "They're establishing legitimate fronts, creating a network of controlled businesses. Classic preparation for major trafficking operations." Through the open bay doors, Sarah watched another group of Iron Wolves riders cruise slowly past, their presence a deliberate reminder of their growing control. But she noticed something her father had surely already seen. Their formation was looser now, their attention divided. They were spreading themselves thin, trying to control too much territory too quickly. "They're overconfident," Michael observed, confirming her thoughts. "Stryker's military background is making him ambitious, pushing too hard too fast. He's trying to lock down the whole town before anyone can organize resistance." A slight smile touched his lips. "He doesn't realize that's exactly what we want him to do." Sarah understood now. Every business the Iron Wolves pressured, every owner they threatened, created another potential ally. The community's fear was real, but it was also building something else. Determination. She saw it in Tommy's clenched fists as he worked on engines, in Susan's straight spine as she faced the day, in the way business owners gathered in quiet groups, sharing information and support. A call came in from Rivers Bend, the next town over. More Iron Wolves activities, more businesses being pressured. The gang's operation was expanding rapidly, but Sarah recognized what her father had already calculated. They were creating too many fronts to watch effectively, too many potential points of resistance. "Your mother would be proud," Michael said softly, watching Sarah track these patterns. "She always said the best defense isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about bringing people together, making them remember what they're really fighting for." As the morning progressed, more community members found their way to Eagle's Nest Auto, drawn by some instinct that recognized strength in Michael's quiet confidence. The shop was becoming more than just a garage. It was transforming into a rallying point, a symbol of resistance against the growing threat. And beneath it all, invisible to casual observers, Michael's network of veterans was quietly mobilizing, preparing to remind the Iron Wolves why some peaceful mountain communities were best left undisturbed. By mid-afternoon, Eagle's Nest Auto Shop had transformed into something that barely resembled a garage. While the front bays maintained normal operations, the back area had become an impromptu command center. Michael worked with military precision, coordinating with unseen allies through secure channels while maintaining the appearance of routine maintenance work. Sarah watched her father move between tasks, noting how each action served multiple purposes. Every repair job also providing cover for surveillance, every customer interaction a chance to gather intelligence. "First team's in position," Michael reported quietly, his phone pressed to his ear while appearing to study a repair manual. "Rodriguez has his people watching the mountain passes. Jenkins is setting up in Rivers Bend." He paused, listening. "Yes, they're pushing harder than expected. Something's accelerating their timeline." Through the shop's windows, Sarah could see more Iron Wolves patrols moving through town, their presence growing more aggressive by the hour. But now she noticed other changes too. Subtle movements in seemingly empty buildings, unmarked vehicles taking strategic positions throughout Silver Peak. Her father's old teammates were arriving, slipping into town as quietly as mountain mist. A delivery truck pulled into the lot, unremarkable except for the driver's too precise movements. The man, who introduced himself only as Mason, carried himself with the same controlled awareness Sarah now recognized in her father. His delivery clipboard concealed sophisticated communications equipment, and his casual conversation was laden with coded updates. "Package secured in Mesa Junction," Mason reported while pretending to review delivery forms. "Teams Echo and Delta in place. Ghost 6 sending regards. Says he owes you for Baghdad." Michael's slight smile suggested this meant more than Sarah could understand. In the back office, transformed now into a tactical planning room, Michael spread out detailed maps of the surrounding mountains. "The Iron Wolves think they're being clever," he explained to Sarah, pointing out marked positions. "Using these passes for their operation, thinking the terrain makes them invisible. What they don't realize is we've been mapping these routes for decades." Sheriff Hayes arrived under the pretense of vehicle maintenance, bringing crucial intelligence. "State police intercepted some interesting radio traffic," he reported. "Large shipment coming through tomorrow night. Sounds like that's why they're pushing so hard to secure local businesses. They need their distribution network in place." Michael absorbed this information with tactical precision. They're rushing their timeline, getting sloppy. Stryker's military training is actually working against him. He's applying conventional tactics to an unconventional situation. He turned to a secure computer terminal hidden behind routine paperwork. "Time to let our people know it's starting." Throughout the afternoon, more seemingly ordinary visitors arrived at Eagle's Nest. Each one carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of special operations veterans. They came disguised as customers, delivery personnel, even lost tourists, but Sarah saw how they moved. Every position calculated, every angle covered, every interaction precise. "Your father's reputation in our community is legendary," one man, introducing himself only as Baker, told Sarah quietly while pretending to inspect a vehicle. The Ghostmakers weren't just about demolitions. They were artists at making things disappear. Criminal operations, weapons caches, entire networks, all vanishing without obvious cause. When he called, we came running. Tommy, who'd refused to leave despite his mother's concerns, was assigned to watch the front of the shop. Michael had given him a crash course in surveillance, what to look for, how to spot surveillance teams, how to communicate suspicious activity without drawing attention. The young mechanic took to it naturally, his enthusiasm for learning now focused on a more urgent purpose. "Multiple vehicles moving through Sawyer's Pass," Tommy reported, having spotted the pattern Michael taught him to recognize. "Same types we discussed. Loading dock activity at the abandoned mill." His observations confirmed what Michael's network had already suspected. The Iron Wolves were staging resources for something big. Sarah worked steadily through legitimate repair jobs while absorbing everything around her. She noticed how her father had positioned every vehicle in the shop to provide cover or block lines of sight. The tool cabinets, she realized, were arranged to create defensive positions while appearing completely normal. Even the shop's lighting had been subtly adjusted to give their side advantages in visibility while creating blind spots for potential threats. "Your mother helped design most of these arrangements," Michael mentioned, noting her observations. "She understood that the best defensive positions are the ones that look completely natural. Every decision in this shop's layout serves both legitimate business and tactical advantage." As evening approached, Michael's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. His expression tightened as he read it. "Stryker's done his homework," he reported to his assembled team. "He's calling in reinforcements, veterans from other chapters, all with special operations backgrounds. They know they're not dealing with ordinary civilians anymore." The sun began setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Silver Peak. In the growing darkness, Sarah could see more Iron Wolves gathering at their temporary headquarters, the recently acquired truck stop on the edge of town. But she also noticed other movements, shadows within shadows, professionals moving with practiced invisibility, taking positions throughout the area. "Tomorrow night's shipment is their vulnerability," Michael explained, gathering his core team. "They have to move it through here. The other routes are too well monitored. They'll throw everything they have at securing their path." He paused, studying the tactical displays. That's exactly what we've been waiting for. Sometimes the best way to dismantle a criminal operation is to let them think they're winning, right up until the moment everything falls apart. The confrontation began with the distant rumble of motorcycles, growing steadily louder as the Iron Wolves approached Eagle's Nest Auto Shop. This time, Stryker had brought serious force. 20 bikes, their riders carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of combat veterans. The late afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across the shop's entrance as the formation surrounded the building, their tactical positioning revealing their professional training. Sarah stood near the office, watching through the windows as Stryker dismounted, flanked by 4 of his most experienced men. The others maintained a perimeter, their positions carefully chosen to control all approaches to the shop. To any ordinary observer, it would have appeared to be an overwhelming show of force. But Sarah had spent the day watching her father prepare, and she now understood that appearances could be deeply deceptive. "Last chance, mechanic," Stryker called out as he entered, making the word sound like an insult. "We've got the paperwork ready. Sign over the shop and everyone goes home happy. Resist and—" He gestured to his men, who had begun moving to predetermined positions throughout the garage. "Well, let's just say we've got some demolitions experts of our own." Michael continued working on an engine, his movements unhurried and precise. "Interesting choice of words," he replied, his voice carrying that same calm that had initially made Stryker suspicious. "Demolitions experts. That's a specific skill set, not something you typically find in a motorcycle club." Stryker's scarred face twisted into a predatory smile. "Did some more digging after our last chat, found some interesting gaps in official records. Places where someone with very particular skills seems to have made things disappear." His hand drifted toward his leather cut, where Sarah knew he carried a concealed weapon. "Thought we were just dealing with some ex-military mechanic. But you're something else entirely, aren't you?" "Just a father protecting his family's business," Michael answered, but something had changed in his bearing. The pretense of simple mechanic was fading, replaced by something harder, more tactical. Sarah noticed how he'd positioned himself relative to Stryker's men, how each seemingly casual movement gave him tactical advantage. "You know what I think?" Stryker moved closer, his confidence bolstered by his numerical superiority. "I think you're one of the ghost makers, those special forces urban legend types who could make entire operations vanish without a trace, the ones they called in when they needed something to look like an accident." The tension in the shop grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Tommy had backed away from his workbench, instinctively moving to a position Michael had shown him earlier. Through the windows, Sarah could see the Iron Wolves outside shifting nervously, something in the atmosphere warning them that events were about to spiral out of their control. "Here's what's going to happen," Stryker continued, gesturing to his men to move into attack positions. "You're going to sign these papers nice and legal. Then you're going to disappear, wherever ghostmakers go when they retire. Because if you don't—" The threat hung unfinished as Michael finally turned to face him fully. "You've made 3 critical mistakes," he said quietly. "First, you assumed numbers equal advantage. Second, you thought this shop's layout was random." He paused, his eyes meeting Stryker's with an intensity that made the bigger man step back slightly. "But your biggest mistake? You brought demolitions experts to confront someone who spent 20 years making things explode without leaving evidence." What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah could barely follow the sequence. 2 of Stryker's men moved to grab Michael, probably intending to demonstrate their superior numbers. Instead, they found themselves expertly redirected into each other, their momentum turned against them with surgical precision. The 3rd man drew a weapon but found his arm locked and controlled before he could level it, his professional training countered by decades of superior experience. Stryker himself moved with the speed of a combat veteran, but Michael was already gone from where he'd been standing. Tools and equipment that had seemed randomly placed suddenly became obstacles and weapons. The carefully positioned vehicles created channels that separated and isolated Stryker's men, turning their numbers against them. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted less than 30 seconds. When it ended, 4 of Stryker's best men were on the ground. Their tactical expertise proved worthless against whatever level of combat mastery they'd just encountered. Stryker himself stood frozen, his hand still reaching for his concealed weapon, as Michael held him in a control position that looked deceptively gentle, but clearly caused enough discomfort to ensure compliance. Like I said, Michael's voice remained calm, as if he were discussing a complicated repair job. You made some critical mistakes. Now we're going to have a professional conversation about your operation's future in this valley. He applied subtle pressure that made Stryker wince. And you're going to realize that some quiet mechanics are best left undisturbed. Outside, the Iron Wolves who had maintained the perimeter found themselves suddenly aware of multiple laser sights appearing on their chests. Michael's veterans had stayed hidden, waiting for exactly this moment. The hunters had become the hunted, their tactical advantage evaporating like morning mist in the mountain sun. "Stand down," Stryker gasped, finally recognizing the depth of his miscalculation. "Stand down. All units. Stand down." His men, those still conscious, released their weapons, combat experience telling them they were dramatically outmatched. "Smart decision," Michael commented, relaxing his hold slightly but maintaining perfect control. "Now about that shipment you're planning for tomorrow night." Word of Stryker's humiliation spread through the Iron Wolves network like wildfire. By nightfall, Eagle's Nest Auto Shop had become the focus of intense scrutiny from forces far more dangerous than a local motorcycle club. Sarah watched from the shop's surveillance system as unmarked vehicles began appearing at strategic points throughout Silver Peak, their occupants carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of professional operators. "They're calling in their real muscle," Michael observed, studying the tactical displays. "These aren't just gang members playing soldier. These are private military contractors, professionals who've gone mercenary." His expression remained calm, but Sarah noticed the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested serious concern. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the lot just after sunset. The man who emerged moved with lethal grace, tall, powerfully built, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. His casual clothing couldn't hide the tactical awareness that analyzed every angle, every approach, every potential threat. This was someone who had spent decades in the shadows of global conflicts. "Colonel Marcus Drake," Michael explained quietly to Sarah, recognition and concern mixing in his voice. "Former Delta Force commander, now runs one of the largest private military companies in the country. If he's here personally, this is bigger than we thought." Drake entered the shop alone, though Sarah noticed at least 4 tactical teams taking positions around the building. He moved through the space with professional assessment, noting the carefully arranged equipment, the strategic layout, the defensive positions disguised as ordinary workshop organization. A slight smile touched his scarred face, the smile of someone who recognized a masterfully crafted operation. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Drake's voice carried authority earned through decades of command. "Or do you prefer mechanic these days? The Ghostmakers were before my time at Delta, but your reputation. Let's say certain operations became required reading at the farm." Michael maintained his position near his toolbox, his stance relaxed but ready. "Just running a family business these days, Colonel, though some people have trouble understanding when they're not welcome in our town." Drake's laugh was genuine but carried an edge of steel. "A family business that just happened to dismantle one of my best tactical teams? Stryker may be overconfident, but he's a trained operator. Yet you took him apart like he was a first-year recruit." He moved to examine a partially disassembled engine. "You know what really impressed me? How you used the shop's layout. Turned our own tactical training against us. Beautiful work." "If you're impressed by the shop layout, you should see our rates for oil changes," Michael replied mildly. "Very competitive." "Always the quiet ones," Drake mused, running a finger along a workbench. "Everyone thinks special forces are all about kicks and punches, dramatic raids in the night. But the real artists? They're the ones who can make an entire operation implode without leaving evidence, the ones who can turn an enemy's strength into their weakness." His eyes locked onto Michael's. The Ghostmakers weren't demolitions experts, they were architects of controlled chaos. Sarah watched the interaction, understanding she was witnessing something beyond a simple confrontation. These were 2 master strategists, recognizing each other's capabilities, measuring approaches, calculating odds. You're expanding too fast, Michael observed quietly. Pushing too hard into too many territories, making mistakes. Growth requires risk, Drake countered. And this valley is worth the risk. Perfect routing, minimal oversight, established businesses that can be repurposed. He gestured around the shop. Like this place. Perfect cover for certain modifications we need to make to certain vehicles. Not going to happen. Michael's voice remained calm, but carried absolute conviction. Lieutenant, Drake sighed, though his eyes remained sharp as tactical blades. You're good. Probably the best I've ever seen at this particular game. But I've got 4 full tactical teams outside, another dozen in town, and enough resources to bury this entire operation under so much legal paperwork you'll never see daylight. Interesting choice of words, Michael replied. Bury, because you seem to have forgotten what the ghost makers really specialized in. He moved slightly, and Sarah noticed how this simple adjustment gave him perfect positioning relative to Drake's position. We didn't just blow things up, Colonel. We engineered circumstances, created situations where the enemy's own actions caused their destruction. Drake's expression shifted as he processed these words, tactical awareness warning him that something wasn't quite right. Is this the part where you demonstrate some spectacular close combat skills? Show me why they called you the Ghost? No, Michael answered simply. This is the part where you realize you've walked into a trap 20 years in the making. Check your phone, Colonel. I believe you'll find some interesting updates about your operation's legal status. Drake's hand moved to his pocket, withdrawing a phone that was suddenly flooding with urgent messages. His face hardened as he read, decades of operational experience recognizing the signs of a masterfully executed plan. You didn't just prepare the shop, he realized aloud. You've been... He stopped, tactical mind putting pieces together. How long have you really been watching this valley? Michael's slight smile carried decades of patient preparation. Welcome to the real ghost story, Colonel. Now, shall we discuss your immediate withdrawal from my town, or would you prefer to see what else we've prepared? Through the shop windows, Sarah noticed more unmarked vehicles arriving, but these weren't Drake's forces. She recognized the subtle positioning, the professional coordination that marked her father's allies. The hunters had once again become the hunted, though Drake's tactical experience was already alerting him to the shift in power. You're not just some retired operator running a garage, Drake said slowly, his mind working through the implications. This whole setup, the shop, the town, the valley, it's all been a waiting game, hasn't it? Watching for someone exactly like us to make exactly this move. Dawn painted the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold as Michael's network sprang into coordinated action. Eagle's Nest Auto Shop had transformed into a sophisticated command center, its ordinary repair operations providing perfect cover for the tactical operations being coordinated from its back office. Sarah watched in amazement as her father orchestrated a response that had clearly been years in the planning. Status report. Michael spoke quietly into a secured communications device disguised as a standard Bluetooth headset. The responses came from positions throughout the valley, each update revealing another layer of prepared defenses that Drake's forces had unknowingly walked into. Mountain team in position, came the first response. All 3 high passes covered. Thermal imaging shows their scout teams exactly where we predicted. The voice belonged to Rodriguez, one of Michael's old teammates who'd been posing as a local hunting guide for years, maintaining watch over the mountain approaches. Rivers Bend secured, Jenkins reported next. Their forward elements just tried to establish a supply line through the old lumber mill. They found some interesting mechanical failures in their vehicles. The satisfaction in his voice suggested these failures were anything but accidental. Sarah monitored the tactical displays, understanding now why her father had insisted she learn every detail of the shop's computer systems. What appeared to be ordinary diagnostic equipment could switch instantly to showing thermal imaging, movement tracking, and encrypted communications across the entire valley. Drake's not just going to withdraw, Michael explained as they worked, maintaining their cover of normal garage operations while coordinating the valley's defense. He's too professional, too committed to his operation, but he's also smart enough to recognize when he's walked into something bigger than he expected. Through the shop's windows, Sarah could see the town coming alive with careful purpose. What looked like normal morning traffic was actually a sophisticated dance of position and counterposition. Drake's tactical teams found their carefully chosen observation posts already occupied or compromised. Their communication channels encountered mysterious interference that seemed to come from the mountain themselves. "They're trying to establish a new operations center at the abandoned warehouse," Tommy reported, having learned to spot the subtle signs Michael taught him. "But they're running into some interesting electrical problems." He grinned slightly. "Amazing how unreliable old wiring can be." Michael nodded approval at the young mechanic's observation. Drake's biggest mistake was assuming we were just reacting to their arrival. He doesn't realize every property they're trying to use has been prepared for years. Every alternative they consider leads them exactly where we want them. A series of encrypted messages flashed across their secure systems. Drake's forces were discovering that their carefully planned operation was falling apart in ways that appeared completely natural. Vehicles developed mysterious mechanical issues. Communication equipment suffered unexplainable failures. Supply lines encountered perfectly normal and completely devastating delays. "Your mother helped set up most of these contingencies," Michael told Sarah as they monitored the situation. "She understood that the best way to stop someone from taking over your community is to make it seem like the community itself is rejecting them. Every business in town has its role, whether they know it or not." Sarah watched as Susan's restaurant reported a health inspection, completely routine, but somehow timed perfectly to disrupt Drake's attempt to use it as a meeting point. The hardware store discovered urgent renovations were needed, precisely when Drake's men tried to establish surveillance from its upper floor. Even old Joe's garage found reason to close its back lot for environmental testing, just as Drake's forces attempted to store equipment there. "The Iron Wolves were just the visible threat," Michael continued, checking another series of updates. "Drake's private military contractors are the real operation, but they make assumptions based on their training, looking for tactical responses, military opposition. They're not prepared for a town that fights back by simply refusing to cooperate in 1,000 small, perfectly legal ways." A black SUV pulled into the lot, and Drake emerged looking considerably less composed than during his previous visit. His tactical experience was telling him something was very wrong with this operation, but the problems he encountered were so mundane, so ordinary, that they defied military response. "Your fuel supply line is about to have certification issues," Michael commented as Drake approached. "The mountain passes will experience unexpected construction delays. Even the weather seems uncooperative. Amazing how accurate local forecasts can be when you've got observers on every peak." Drake's expression showed the frustration of a master strategist recognizing that his own tactical excellence was being used against him. "You haven't thrown a single punch," he observed with professional admiration. "Haven't made a single overtly hostile move. Yet my entire operation is being dismantled by... what? Bad luck? Coincidence? Small-town bureaucracy?" "Sometimes the best way to fight isn't to fight at all," Michael replied, continuing his work on an engine as if this were just another business conversation. "The Ghostmakers didn't just destroy things, Colonel. We created situations where the target's own actions caused their defeat. Your tactical teams are so busy looking for threats that they can't see how the entire valley is designed to reject them, like antibodies fighting an infection." Drake moved closer, his tactical mind processing the implications. "You've turned the entire town into a weapon without anyone even knowing they're part of your operation." His voice carried both frustration and professional respect. "Every business, every routine inspection, every mundane delay, they're all part of your defense network." "Not my network, Colonel," Michael corrected, his hands steady on the engine. "The town's network. Silver Peak protects itself. We just helped it learn how." He paused, checking another incoming alert on his disguised system. "By the way, your backup team trying to establish a position at the old fire station? They're about to discover some fascinating historical preservation regulations." As evening settled over Silver Peak, Michael led Sarah to a hidden section of Eagle's Nest Auto Shop that she'd never known existed. Behind a seemingly solid wall in the storage room, concealed by years of carefully stacked parts and equipment, he revealed a heavy steel door with a sophisticated electronic lock. The space beyond resembled a military archive more than a garage storage room. "Your mother helped me build this," Michael explained, his voice soft with memory as he activated the lighting systems. "She understood that some legacies need to be preserved, some stories kept safe until the right moment." The room contained rows of carefully organized files, surveillance equipment, and tactical gear that told the story of decades of patient vigilance. Sarah moved through the space, taking in the history of her family that she'd never known. Photos lined one wall. Her father with various teams, their faces carefully blurred but their bearing unmistakable as special operations units. Maps of the valley marked with notations spanning years of observation. Equipment that looked more suited to covert operations than auto repair. "I wasn't just any demolitions expert," Michael continued, pulling out a worn leather folder. "The ghost makers were different. We didn't just destroy targets when we engineered circumstances, created situations where enemy operations would fall apart in ways that appeared completely natural." He spread photographs across a tactical desk, each showing the aftermath of operations that officially never happened. "We specialized in making things disappear without evidence. Weapon shipments would develop mechanical failures at crucial moments. Supply lines would encounter perfectly normal delays that somehow proved devastating. Criminal organizations would find their operations dismantled by seemingly random events." His voice carried both pride and a hint of weariness. "It was a different kind of warfare, invisible, patient, precise." Sarah picked up one photo that caught her eye. Her father, younger but recognizable, standing amid the wreckage of what appeared to be a sophisticated smuggling operation. "But why here?" she asked. "Why Silver Peak?" Michael's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "I met your mother during an operation. The cartel we were tracking had chosen this valley for their route, thinking a small mountain town would be perfect cover. But they kept running into problems, mechanical issues, timing problems, local regulations that somehow always worked against them." He smiled at the memory. "Turned out your mother was the reason. She'd noticed unusual patterns in vehicle modifications coming through local garages, started documenting everything, building a network of observers throughout the valley. By the time my team arrived to investigate, she had practically dismantled their operation herself through perfectly legal, completely ordinary means." Sarah thought about her mother, the strong, clever woman who'd taught her every aspect of running a garage while apparently helping maintain a sophisticated intelligence network. "She never told me," she said quietly. "She wanted you to have a choice," Michael replied. "To learn the skills without the burden of knowing their true purpose. Every repair technique she taught you, every business practice she insisted on, they all served double duty. Running a legitimate business while maintaining perfect awareness of everything moving through our valley." Through the reinforced windows, Sarah could see Drake's forces still trying to establish control of the town, still running into the countless small obstacles and delays that her parents had spent years preparing. The Iron Wolves, Drake's contractors, they're not the first to try this, are they? "No," Michael confirmed, accessing a secure computer system hidden behind innocuous filing cabinets. "Every few years someone discovers this valley's potential. They always think they're being clever, using small towns for cover. They never realize these small towns have been watching and waiting, ready to respond in ways their tactical training can't counter." He pulled up surveillance feeds showing various points throughout Silver Peak. "Your mother understood something crucial. The best defense isn't about weapons or confrontation. It's about making your community naturally resistant to outside control. Every business that looks ordinary but serves a strategic purpose. Every routine inspection that can be activated at exactly the right moment. Every delay and regulation that seems perfectly normal but forms part of an invisible barrier." Sarah studied the tactical displays, seeing her hometown with new understanding. Every repair shop, every diner, every small business that seemed so ordinary was actually part of a sophisticated defensive network. "How many people know," she asked, "about what this town really is?" "Only a few," Michael replied. Most people just go about their lives, not realizing they're part of something larger. That's what makes it work. The defense is built into the community's natural rhythm. Drake's tactical teams are trained to look for military responses, not 1,000 small acts of perfectly legal resistance. He turned to his daughter, his expression both proud and serious. Your mother always said our real legacy wasn't just about protecting the valley. It was about teaching the next generation to maintain the watch, to understand that sometimes the quietest defense is the most effective. Sarah looked around the hidden command center, at the years of patient preparation and vigilance documented on its walls. She understood now that she'd inherited more than just a garage. She'd inherited a responsibility to maintain this invisible shield that protected their home through nothing more dramatic than careful observation and perfectly timed ordinary actions. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded Silver Peak in shadows as Michael's network hummed with increased activity. Eagle's Nest Auto Shop had become the center of a sophisticated operation, its ordinary appearance masking the coordination of multiple teams throughout the valley. Sarah watched the tactical displays showing Drake's forces attempting to establish control points for their upcoming shipment, each attempt meeting perfectly natural but devastatingly effective resistance. Final positions confirmed, Rodriguez reported through their secure communications. Their advance teams are exactly where we predicted, trying to secure the mountain passes. His voice carried the satisfaction of a professional watching a plan come together. They're still looking for military threats, completely missing the real trap. Michael studied the displays, his expression focused as he coordinated their response. Mason's team in position at the old lumber mill? He asked, though the tactical readouts had already confirmed this. Years of operations had taught him to verify everything personally. In place and invisible, came the response. They won't spot us unless they're specifically looking for mechanics doing perfectly routine maintenance on logging equipment. The humor in Mason's voice suggested this was exactly the kind of cover the Ghostmakers had perfected. Through the shop's windows, Sarah could see more of Drake's unmarked vehicles moving through town, their operators maintaining professional discipline, but showing signs of mounting frustration. Every attempt to establish secure positions had been met with ordinary obstacles that somehow proved insurmountable. They're pushing harder now, Michael observed, noting patterns in the enemy's movement. Drake knows something's wrong with this operation, but his tactical training is actually working against him. He's looking for military responses, not realizing the entire town is the response. Tommy rushed in from his observation post, his young face excited but controlled. Mr. Mitchell, their supply team just tried to store equipment at the warehouse, but they're having trouble with the building inspector. Something about urgent structural assessments that can't wait. Michael nodded approval at the young mechanic's report. Your mother's idea, he told Sarah. She set up a network of completely legitimate inspection protocols that could be activated whenever we needed them. Drake's men can't fight it without drawing exactly the kind of attention they're trying to avoid. Sarah monitored the communications channels, watching as more of Drake's carefully planned operation encountered the invisible resistance her parents had spent years preparing. They're moving their backup equipment to the abandoned factory, she reported, having learned to read the patterns in seemingly routine traffic. Right on schedule, Michael replied, sending a series of encoded signals through their secure system. Jenkins, time to activate Phase 3. Within minutes, reports started flowing in. The factory's power supply developed mysterious issues. Environmental inspectors appeared with concerns about water runoff. Even the local wildlife seemed uncooperative, as a family of protected mountain goats chose that exact moment to take up residence near the factory's access road. Drake's getting desperate, Michael noted, watching the tactical feeds. His shipment's coming tonight, but he can't establish secure control points. Every fallback position he planned is somehow compromised. He turned to Sarah, his expression serious. This is when it gets dangerous. Professional operators are most lethal when they're forced to improvise. As if confirming his words, new movement appeared on their screens. Drake's forces were abandoning subtlety, moving more aggressively through town. Their vehicles took up tactical positions with less concern for maintaining cover, and their operators' body language suggested increasing readiness for direct action. They're shifting to their contingency plans, Michael explained, recognizing patterns he'd seen in countless operations. Drake's realizing he can't establish quiet control, so he's preparing to take what he needs by force. He accessed another level of their security systems. Time to show him why that's an even worse idea. Sarah watched as her father activated protocols that had been waiting years for this moment. Throughout Silver Peak, carefully prepared positions became active. Veterans who had been living quiet lives as shopkeepers and craftsmen moved with professional precision to defensive positions that had been built into the town's very architecture. "Your mother believed in layers," Michael said, coordinating the response. "The first layer is passive, all those ordinary obstacles and delays. The second layer is active but still invisible, our network of observers and preventive measures. But the third layer..." He paused as more tactical readings appeared. "The third layer reminds them why some quiet towns are best left alone." Through their surveillance systems, Sarah could see Drake's forces encountering a new level of resistance. Their communications faced sophisticated jamming that seemed to come from the mountains themselves. Their vehicles found routes mysteriously blocked by accidents that were too precisely placed to be coincidental. Even the weather appeared to work against them, as carefully positioned equipment created visibility problems exactly where they needed clear lines of sight. "Final preparations complete," Rodriguez reported. "All teams in position. Ghost protocol active and waiting for trigger conditions." The professional satisfaction in his voice suggested that Drake's forces were about to discover why the Ghostmaker's reputation had become legend in special operations circles. Michael checked the time, knowing Drake's shipment would arrive in less than 12 hours. "Remember," he told his assembled teams, "we're not just protecting a town. We're defending a way of life that some people think is vulnerable simply because it's quiet. Time to remind them that the quietest communities are often the most dangerous to threaten." The confrontation began at midnight, marked by the distant rumble of heavy trucks moving through the mountain passes. Drake's shipment had arrived, and with it, the decisive moment that would determine Silver Peak's future. Eagle's Nest Auto Shop hummed with controlled tension as Michael's network tracked multiple threats converging on their position. "Convoy approaching from the North Pass," Rodriguez reported through their secure channels. 4 heavy trucks, military-grade escort vehicles front and rear. They're running dark, using terrain masking to avoid main roads. His voice carried professional appreciation. "Tactical deployment suggests ex-Special Forces security teams." Michael studied the tactical displays, watching as Drake's operation revealed its true scale. More vehicles were moving into position throughout Silver Peak, their operators dropping any pretense of being ordinary citizens. These were elite military contractors preparing to take what they wanted by force. "They're expecting resistance," Michael observed, noting their formation patterns. "But they're looking for traditional defensive positions, military-style ambush points." A slight smile touched his lips. "They still don't understand what they're really facing." Sarah monitored their security feeds as Drake's forces established a perimeter around the town. Their movements showed professional precision, but she now recognized the flaws in their approach. They were fighting the last war, preparing for the kind of resistance they understood, rather than the invisible network they'd actually encountered. "All teams, execute Ghost Protocol," Michael commanded quietly. Throughout Silver Peak, carefully prepared positions activated. But instead of dramatic military action, the response was subtle, almost invisible. Traffic lights developed mysterious timing issues that split Drake's convoy. Construction barriers appeared at crucial intersections, their permits perfectly legal and completely devastating to the operation's timeline. Drake himself arrived at Eagle's Nest in a convoy of black SUVs, his tactical teams taking up aggressive positions around the shop. This time there was no pretense of negotiation. His operators moved with the direct purpose of men prepared for combat. "Last chance, Mitchell," Drake called out as he entered, his voice carrying command authority. "We're taking this town tonight. You can either stand down and live to run your garage or..." He gestured to his men, who had taken up professional firing positions. "Well, let's just say accidents happen in combat zones." Michael continued working on an engine, his movements unhurried but precise. "Interesting choice of words, Colonel. Accidents. That was always our specialty, wasn't it? making things happen that looked perfectly natural. He straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Check your tactical feeds. I think you'll find tonight's operation isn't going quite as planned. Drake's hand moved to his earpiece as urgent reports began flooding in. His convoy had encountered multiple mechanical failures, all appearing completely normal, but somehow affecting their most crucial vehicles. The mountain passes were experiencing unexpected rock slides that seemed suspiciously well placed. Even their communications were failing in ways that suggested sophisticated interference disguised as natural terrain effects. "What have you done?" Drake demanded, though his expression showed he was beginning to understand. His tactical teams shifted nervously as more reports of equipment failures and mysterious obstacles poured in. "Me? Nothing." Michael's calm reply carried absolute conviction. But a town that spent 20 years preparing for this moment? That's a different story. He gestured to their surroundings. "Look around, Colonel. Really look. Every business that wouldn't cooperate, every delay that seemed coincidental, every mechanical failure that appeared natural. It's all part of the defense." Through their surveillance systems, Sarah watched Drake's operation unravel with devastating precision. His vehicles were being systematically disabled by mechanical issues that any inspection would show were perfectly normal wear and tear. His teams found themselves isolated by a series of ordinary events that somehow left them tactically vulnerable. "You still don't see it, do you?" Michael continued, moving with calculated purpose as Drake's men tried to maintain their tactical positions. "You thought you were fighting one retired operator. Instead, you're facing an entire community that's been trained to resist exactly this kind of takeover. Every mechanic who knows exactly how to disable engines without leaving evidence. Every building inspector who can cite regulations that just happen to disrupt your operations. Every business owner who knows exactly when to activate protocols that appear completely legitimate, but prove devastatingly effective." Drake's tactical experience was telling him something was very wrong, but his training had never prepared him for this kind of resistance. His men were combat veterans, experts in dealing with military threats, but they were helpless against a defense that operated within perfectly legal, completely ordinary parameters. "Your entire operation is built on looking legitimate," Michael explained, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had orchestrated similar collapses. "Which means you can't fight back against legitimate resistance without exposing yourselves. Every countermeasure you take only makes you more vulnerable, more visible, more obviously what you're trying to hide." Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles marked the arrival of state and federal law enforcement, all responding to various routine complaints and ordinary regulations that just happened to concentrate on Drake's operation. The trap wasn't just mechanical or tactical. It was legal, social, and completely inescapable. "Check your secure channels," Michael suggested mildly. "I believe you'll find some interesting chatter about your organization's activities across several states. Amazing how many patterns emerge when quiet communities start comparing notes about unusual business practices." Dawn broke over Silver Peak, painting the mountains in shades of victory as the last of Drake's forces were escorted from town by state and federal authorities. Eagle's Nest Auto Shop hummed with the quiet satisfaction of a mission perfectly executed, its ordinary appearance masking the sophisticated operation that had just dismantled a major criminal enterprise without firing a single shot. "Final reports coming in," Rodriguez announced through their secure channels. "Drake's entire network is collapsing. Similar accidents and regulatory issues are hitting their operations across 3 states. Amazing how many quiet towns had been watching and waiting for exactly this moment." The professional appreciation in his voice suggested this was the kind of victory the Ghostmakers had always valued most. Complete, undeniable, yet officially appearing entirely natural. Sarah watched through the shop windows as unmarked federal vehicles efficiently processed the scene. Drake's private military contractors, now stripped of their tactical gear, looked remarkably ordinary as they were led away in handcuffs. Their sophisticated operation had been undone not by dramatic combat, but by the patient resistance of a community that had spent years preparing for exactly this confrontation. "Your mother would be proud," Michael said quietly, standing beside his daughter as they observed the aftermath. She always said the best victories are the ones that look like simple law enforcement doing its job. No dramatic shootouts, no spectacular battles, just the quiet triumph of ordinary people protecting their way of life. Through their surveillance systems, they could see similar scenes playing out across town. The Iron Wolves' attempted takeover had inadvertently exposed a much larger criminal operation, leading to coordinated law enforcement actions that appeared completely routine, but were devastating in their precision. Every piece of evidence pointed to ordinary regulatory violations and standard criminal activity, nothing that would reveal the sophisticated network that had orchestrated their downfall. Sheriff Hayes arrived with the morning's first coffee delivery, his casual demeanor masking the satisfaction of a plan well executed. "State police are calling it one of the biggest organized crime busts in Colorado history," he reported, setting down the cups. "Weapons trafficking, money laundering, illegal vehicle modifications, all discovered through routine inspections and standard police work." His smile suggested he understood exactly how routine these discoveries had been. Tommy burst in, his young face glowing with excitement barely contained by his newfound professional discipline. "Mr. Mitchell, the news is calling it a major victory for small-town law enforcement. They're saying how it shows the importance of community policing and local business cooperation." He paused, grinning. "Nobody suspects anything about the real operation." "That's the point, son," Michael replied, his voice carrying quiet pride. "The best defense isn't just about stopping threats. It's about making victory look so natural that no one questions how it happened. Every business that, coincidentally, caused problems for their operation, every inspection that happened to find irregularities, every mechanical failure that appeared perfectly normal. It all tells a story that people want to believe." Susan Chen arrived with breakfast for everyone, her restaurant having played its own crucial role in the town's defense. "3 more of Drake's teams tried to use my place as a command center last night," she reported with satisfaction. "Such a shame about the health inspection, and the electrical problems, and the water main issue. Amazing how many things can go wrong all at once." Throughout the morning, more community members stopped by Eagle's Nest, each sharing their part in the victory. The hardware store owner who had accidentally sold Drake's men defective equipment, the hotel manager whose booking system had mysteriously malfunctioned at crucial moments, even old Joe from the competing garage, who had somehow never quite managed to repair their vehicles correctly. "The Iron Wolves thought they were targeting a vulnerable town," Michael explained to Sarah as they worked, maintaining their cover of normal operations while monitoring the final stages of the operation. Instead, they exposed themselves to a defense network that's been waiting decades for exactly this kind of threat. Every business in Silver Peak played its part, whether they knew it or not. Gloria Martinez, the sheriff's wife, brought fresh coffee and intelligence from her diner. "Drake's lawyers are already distancing themselves from the operation," she reported. "Apparently, their legitimate business contracts are experiencing some interesting audit findings. Amazing how many financial irregularities can surface all at once." Through the shop's windows, Sarah watched Silver Peak return to its normal rhythm. Tourists wandered the streets, completely unaware of the sophisticated operation that had just played out. Local businesses opened their doors, their owners secure in the knowledge that their quiet resistance had protected their way of life. "We're not just mechanics," Michael said softly, noting his daughter's thoughtful expression. "We're guardians of something precious, a community that protects itself through unity and patience rather than force. Your mother understood that. It's why she made sure you learned every aspect of running this shop, every detail that could serve both legitimate business and community defense." As the morning progressed, Michael's network began standing down, their sophisticated surveillance equipment once again hidden behind the ordinary facade of small-town life. The Ghostmaker's victory would be recorded in official reports as nothing more spectacular than good police work and community cooperation, exactly the kind of triumph they had specialized in creating. 6 months after Drake's operation collapsed, Eagle's Nest Auto Shop celebrated its 30th anniversary serving Silver Peak. The mountain morning dawned crisp and clear as Sarah Mitchell rolled up the heavy garage doors, just as 3 generations of her family had done before her. The shop looked exactly as it always had, a testament to honest work and community service. But now she understood the deeper legacy hidden beneath its ordinary appearance. Latest reports from the federal task force, Michael commented quietly as they prepared for the day's work. Drake's entire organization has been dismantled. Similar coincidental discoveries are shutting down comparable operations across 6 states. His slight smile suggested these coincidences were anything but random. Amazing how many quiet towns had been watching and waiting, sharing information through networks of ordinary businesses. Tommy, now officially a junior partner in the shop, moved through his morning routine with new purpose. His technical skills had grown alongside his understanding of the garage's deeper mission. Every repair he performed, every diagnostic he ran, served both its obvious purpose and the continuous defense of their community. "Got some interesting chatter from the trucking companies," he reported, having learned to spot the patterns Michael had taught him. 3 different outfits tried establishing new routes through the valley last month. All of them had interesting mechanical issues that made them reconsider. His grin showed pride in applying his skills to both automotive repair and community protection. Through the shop's windows, Sarah could see Silver Peak thriving in the morning sun. Susan's restaurant was packed with tourists enjoying breakfast, while the hardware store received its morning deliveries. Everything looked perfectly normal, exactly as her parents had designed it to be. The town's sophisticated defense network remained invisible, hidden within the ordinary rhythms of small-town life. "Your mother always said the best security is the kind nobody notices," Michael observed, watching his daughter monitor their hidden systems while handling routine customer service. She made sure every business in town could serve both its public purpose and our deeper mission without anyone realizing the difference. The morning brought its usual parade of customers. Mr. Henderson still babied his classic Mustang, though now Sarah recognized how his daily visits provided perfect coverage for monitoring traffic patterns through town. Mrs. Patterson's regular maintenance checks coincidentally matched the schedule for surveillance of key access routes. Even old Joe's competing garage played its role, their supposedly inferior work ensuring that certain types of vehicles never quite operated properly in the valley. "Rodriguez called from the hunting lodge," Sarah reported, decoding the encrypted message hidden in routine business communications. 3 more private military contractors tried scouting the mountain passes last week. They encountered some fascinating wildlife issues. Apparently, mountain goats can be remarkably uncooperative when needed. Michael nodded approval at his daughter's growing expertise in both automotive repair and tactical awareness. "The Iron Wolves and Drake's operation taught everyone valuable lessons," he said, adjusting a surveillance camera disguised as ordinary security equipment. "Now every business in town understands their role in our defense network, whether they know the full scope or not." Sheriff Hayes stopped by for his morning coffee, bringing news disguised as casual conversation. "State police are amazed by our low crime rates," he reported with satisfaction. "Can't figure out why criminal organizations seem to avoid Silver Peak. Must be our reputation for strict vehicle inspections and rigorous business regulations." The shop's hidden systems continued their quiet vigilance as Sarah and Michael worked on actual repairs. Every diagnostic tool served double duty. Every computer system masked sophisticated monitoring equipment. Every routine maintenance procedure provided cover for checking potential threats. The garage remained exactly what it appeared to be, a legitimate business serving its community, while maintaining its role as a crucial node in an invisible defense network. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever be able to relax," Sarah commented as they finished a complex engine rebuild. "If there will ever be a time when we don't need to maintain this level of vigilance." Michael's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "Your mother asked me the same question once. The truth is, this is relaxing, for people like us. Living ordinary lives, serving our community, while maintaining the watch that keeps it safe. The garage isn't just our cover. It's who we are. The fact that it also helps protect everything we care about just makes it more meaningful." As evening approached, Sarah watched the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. Eagle's Nest Auto Shop had closed for the day, but its hidden systems continued their eternal vigilance. The tools were cleaned and stored, the floors swept, the ordinary business of a small-town garage completed with professional pride. "We're not just mechanics. Michael said quietly, standing beside his daughter as they prepared to lock up. We're guardians of a way of life that some people think is vulnerable simply because it's quiet. Your mother understood that. She made sure you learned everything you'd need to carry on both legacies, the visible one of honest work and community service, and the invisible one of constant, patient protection. Sarah smiled, understanding now the full weight of her inheritance. Eagle's Nest Auto Shop would continue serving Silver Peak just as it always had, maintaining both its reputations, the public one for excellent automotive work, and the hidden one that reminded certain organizations why some quiet mountain towns were best left undisturbed. The legacy of the Ghostmakers lived on, not in dramatic actions or violent confrontations, but in the patient, invisible resistance of ordinary people protecting their extraordinary way of life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.